This is a story titled 13 Hours. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the tale. Chapter 1. The final mask. Hercule Poirot sat in his favorite chair, carefully straightening his newspaper. The morning light filtering through the curtains of his London apartment played across the detective's immaculately polished black shoes. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 9 time for his first cup of cocoa. Just then, the doorbell rang. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Visitors at such an early hour were rare. His faithful friend Captain Hastings entered with the air of a man bearing important news. "My dear Poirot," he began without preamble, "have you heard about the tragedy at St. Jude's Clinic?" The little Belgian set aside his newspaper and steepled his fingers. His green eyes gleamed with interest. "I have only glanced at the headlines, mon ami. Another story about plastic surgery. Yes, these days, everyone wishes to become someone else. But this is a special case," Hastings countered, pulling a bundle of documents from his briefcase. "A woman checked into the clinic 2 weeks ago, paid an enormous sum for a complete facial reconstruction. Last night, she died 13 hours after the final procedure." "Curio," Poirot murmured. "And what makes this case worthy of the great Hercule Poirot's attention?" Hastings leaned forward, lowering his voice. "No one knows who she was. All her documents proved fake. Even her biological samples, taken before surgery, vanished from the lab." Now Poirot was truly intrigued. He rose from his chair and began his characteristic pacing about the room. "Tell me more about this mysterious lady." She was about 35, spoke with a slight Eastern European accent, called herself Sophia Cross, but no such person exists. Paid cash through an intermediary. Her only condition was that she must leave the clinic exactly 13 hours after the final operation. "Perquoi tries hers," Poirot mused aloud. "What is so special about this number?" "Exactly," Hastings exclaimed. "Now consider this. 12 hours and 50 minutes after the operation, a nurse found the patient dead in her room. Cause of death: cyanide poisoning. But here's the strangest part: security cameras show no one entered that room for 12 hours prior. And no one left," Poirot clarified, halting his pacing. "No one. The room was searched, no traces of poison. The only missing item was the mirror from the bathroom." Poirot froze, his face illuminated by that familiar spark of intuition known to all who'd met him. The mirror? How symbolic. A woman who sought to completely change her appearance, and the only thing that disappears with her is her reflection. "C'est magnifique. Will you take the case?" Hastings asked. "But yes, my friend. This is most intriguing. We deal with a woman who wished to erase her past, but perhaps underestimated how dangerous the future could be." At that moment, Poirot's housekeeper entered with a telegram on a silver tray. The Belgian took it and quickly scanned its contents. "Oh, how timely! From the clinic's head surgeon. He requests my immediate presence. There's been another incident." "Another?" Hastings sounded surprised. "Indeed. It seems one of the nurses just fainted in that same room. And do you know what, mon cher ami? She too speaks with a slight Eastern European accent." Poirot gave Hastings a meaningful look, and the captain understood this would be one of those cases where apparent simplicity concealed layer upon layer of mystery, like a nesting doll hiding yet another doll inside. "I believe we should proceed to the clinic at once," the detective said, adjusting his impeccable tie. "Every minute counts, especially when dealing with 13 hours. As they moved toward the exit, Poirot couldn't shake the feeling that this story was like looking into a mirror after a long illness. You see your reflection, yet it feels foreign. Something has changed imperceptibly, but you can't yet determine what." "Hastings," he said while putting on his coat, "remember, sometimes people change faces to hide from others. But more often, they try to hide from themselves." The car waited outside. Poirot settled into the seat, his little grey cells already working at full capacity. The first chapter of this story had only just begun, yet he already sensed the ending would prove most unexpected. At the clinic, they were met by the chief surgeon, a tall man with an anxious expression. But before he could utter a word, Poirot raised his hand. "Say nothing yet, monsieur. First show me the room. Let my eyes see what others have seen. Then we shall talk." Chapter 2: Reflections of Truth. St. Jude's Clinic was an imposing Victorian-era building, remodeled to meet modern needs. The marble floors shone so brightly that Poirot couldn't help but feel the urge to check how perfectly his impeccable parting was reflected in them. "Monsieur Poirot," the chief doctor, Dr. Elliot, nervously fidgeted with his glasses, "I must warn you, the situation is extremely delicate. We cannot afford any publicity." "Mon cher docteur," Poirot gently interrupted him, "my job is not to create scandals, but to solve mysteries. And this one," he made a dramatic pause, "is particularly intriguing." They went up to the third floor, where room number 13 was located. The detective noted this symbolic number to himself, though outwardly he showed no sign of surprise. "Let me start from the beginning," Dr. Elliot continued. "The patient was admitted to us 2 weeks ago. She insisted on complete confidentiality and paid everything in cash through a proxy. The only unusual request was that she had to leave the clinic exactly 13 hours after the final surgery." "And why exactly 13? Hastings asked. "She said it had special significance for her," the doctor replied. "Something related to her past." But she didn't elaborate further. Poirot carefully examined the room. Everything was spotlessly clean, as expected in an expensive private clinic. But his experienced eye immediately picked up several important details. A faint touch mark on the inside of the window glass, barely noticeable scratches on the windowsill, the strange arrangement of furniture, as if someone had deliberately created zones inaccessible to surveillance cameras. "Now tell me about the nurse," he requested. "Miss Radovansky," began the doctor, "has been working with us for 6 months. Excellent references from Warsaw. But this morning, when entering this room—" Yes, I understand," Poirot impatiently interrupted. "But what exactly was she doing here?" "Preparing the room for a new patient," the doctor answered. "She was simply arranging medications in the bedside table and fainted." "Interesting," the detective drawled. "And what about the patient's last minutes? Did anyone communicate with her?" "Only Nurse Radovansky," said the doctor. "She brought medications strictly according to schedule. The last time was about an hour before the incident." Poirot suddenly froze, looking at the wall opposite the bed. There, where a mirror once hung, remained barely visible mounting marks. "Monsieur Poirot," Hastings called out worriedly. "The mirror," the detective mused. "It should have reflected the bed, n'est-ce pas? So the patient could see her new face in her last minutes of life." "Yes, but we've already found it," the doctor reported. "In the basement, shattered into tiny pieces." "Ah bon?" Poirot's eyes sparkled. "And who brought it there?" "The janitor," the doctor replied. "He said he found it in the trash container." "How convenient," Poirot muttered. "Everyone so helpfully finds evidence and then destroys it themselves." He approached the window and carefully examined the frame. His fingers touched a barely noticeable scratch on the inside of the glass. "Mon ami Hastings," he suddenly said, "what do you see here?" "A scratch," Hastings suggested uncertainly. "Exactement. Now look at the corner of the windowsill." Hastings leaned in and saw several dark dots there. "Paint," he suggested. "Non, mon cher. These are traces of some adhesive substance. Someone recently attached something to the window and was in a hurry to remove it." Dr. Elliot turned pale. "Do you think it's part of the evidence?" "I think," Poirot slowly said, "that someone wanted to make sure the patient couldn't see her reflection in her last minutes of life." "But why?" If she paid for a new face, why was she afraid to see it? Maybe she discovered something about herself, Hastings suggested. Or someone didn't want her to discover something else. Poirot thoughtfully added, "Time, Doctor. Time is the key to this whole case. 13 hours, too precise a time frame for a simple coincidence. But why would anyone kill a woman who just spent a fortune on a new face?" Hastings wondered. "Exactly," Poirot exclaimed. "It defies all human logic. If I wanted to kill someone, why wait until they spent huge amounts on plastic surgery? No, my friend, there's something else here. Someone used plastic surgery as a means to achieve their goal." "What goal?" both the doctor and Hastings asked simultaneously. "That's what we need to find out," Poirot replied, taking out his notebook. "And now I need to see Nurse Radovansky. Perhaps he saw something important without even realizing it." Chapter 3: Cracks in the Mask. Nurse Radovansky lay in a private room under observation. Her pale face was almost as white as the hospital pillow. At the sight of Poirot, she tried to sit up, but the detective gently gestured for her to stay put. "Mademoiselle," he began in his most disarming tone, "I understand you've been through a shock, but a few words could be extremely important." I just walked into the room," she started in a trembling voice with a distinct accent. "I wanted to check the medications before the new patient arrived." "And what did you feel?" Poirot asked softly. "Strange." She grimaced, as if trying to remember. "It felt like someone was standing behind me. I turned around, no one there. And then, darkness." Poirot exchanged a quick glance with Hastings. The latter nodded almost imperceptibly. This matched the statements of other witnesses. "Did you often visit the patient?" The detective continued his questioning. "Yes, every 4 hours, to monitor her condition and administer medication," the nurse replied. But she hardly spoke. Only once she asked, "A strange thing." "What exactly?" Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "She asked if I had ever seen my face in the mirror after losing consciousness." The nurse shuddered. "It sounded so creepy." "Very interesting," Poirot muttered. "And you?" "Me? No, of course not," the woman answered, confused. "Who can see anything when unconscious?" "Exactly," the detective said quietly. "No one. Because an unconscious person cannot see themselves in the mirror. It's impossible." "Monsieur Poirot, Doctor," Elliot interjected, "do you think—" "I believe our mysterious patient knew something very important about loss of consciousness and mirrors," Poirot interrupted him. "Something so important that she was willing to pay any price to conceal it." He turned to the nurse. "Mademoiselle Radovansky, your accent. You're from Warsaw, aren't you?" "Yes," she nodded. "But I studied in Prague." "Why do you ask?" "Our patient also spoke with an Eastern European accent," Poirot mused. "An interesting coincidence, n'est-ce pas?" The nurse paled even more. "Do you think I'm somehow connected?" "Non, non, non." The detective quickly reassured her. "Just an observation. But may I ask one more question? Have you had any strange patients in the last month? Someone who made you uneasy?" "Now that you mention it." The nurse bit her lip. "There was one man. Middle-aged. He came to visit another patient, but kept trying to peek into this room. Said he was looking for his sister." "Description?" Poirot asked quickly. "Tall, dark hair, scar on the right eyebrow," she answered. "But the strangest thing, his eyes. They were empty, as if he looked but didn't see." Poirot made a note in his notebook. "And when did you last see him?" "A day before." "The incident," the nurse shuddered. "He asked about the mirror in the room. Said his sister was always afraid of her own reflection." "Ah, now we're getting somewhere." Poirot stood up. "Mon ami Hastings, we need to examine the registry. There might be records of his visits." Indeed, they found an entry in the registration log. "Mr. Kovalev, relative of patient number 15. But further checking showed there was no patient number 15. A false lead, Hastings stated. Oui et non, Poirot objected. It's real enough to appear real. This person wanted us to know about his existence. But why? Hastings wondered. Because he's playing with us, the detective answered grimly. Like a cat with a mouse. He leaves us crumbs of information to make us feel smart while he weaves his web. At that moment, the janitor who found the mirror entered the room. Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot, but I need to get back to work, Doctor. Elliot asked me to remind you about confidentiality. Merci, mon brave, Poirot nodded. Ah yes, one small detail. Where exactly did you find the mirror? In the container near the morgue, the janitor replied. It was wrapped in a sheet. Interessant, the detective drawled. And why would someone put a broken mirror there? The janitor shrugged. I don't know, monsieur. Maybe because it's cold there. Cold, Poirot repeated, and suddenly his face brightened. Mais oui, of course. Cold, cold, Hastings repeated. Yes, my friend. The mirror was found in the morgue, where it's cold. And what happens to certain substances in the cold? They crystallize, Hastings suggested. Exactement, Poirot exclaimed. Our murderer wanted to freeze the evidence. Time, mirrors, chemical reactions. All pieces of one puzzle. But which one? Hastings asked. That's what we'll discover in the next 13 hours, Poirot smiled mysteriously. Chapter 4. The Chemistry of Fear. Poirot stood in the clinic's morgue, carefully examining the metal container where the mirror shard was found. His impeccable shoes reflected on the sterile floor surface, but the detective's thoughts were preoccupied with entirely different reflections. Mon ami Hastings, he said, taking out his magnifying glass, what do you see on this shard? Nothing special, Hastings shrugged. Just broken glass. Ah, but look closer. Poirot pointed to a barely noticeable white residue along the edges of the shard. This is no ordinary glass. It's a window into a mystery. You think? Hastings began. Yes, precisely. Poirot impatiently interrupted him. Our little grey cells must work faster. This residue, traces of some chemical compound that crystallized at low temperatures. He turned to the forensic expert. Monsieur, I need a detailed analysis of this substance. Immediately. It's already done, the expert unexpectedly replied, handing over an envelope with the results. It's quite unusual. Poirot quickly scanned the documents. His eyebrows raised in surprise. Nom d'un petit bonhomme. Just as I suspected. What is it? Hastings asked impatiently. Potassium cyanide, Poirot answered. But most interestingly, it was applied to the mirror as an invisible coating so. When the patient looked into the mirror, Hastings began. Exactement, Poirot exclaimed. The poison evaporated upon contact with warm air. She literally killed herself by looking at her new face. Good heavens, Hastings gasped. But why would anyone need such a complicated murder? Precisely, Poirot picked up. Why not just add poison to food or drinks? Why use a mirror? Why wait 13 hours? He sank back into thought, pacing around the morgue. His gaze stopped at a row of medical cabinets. And if, he slowly said, what if this isn't just a murder? What if it's an experiment? An experiment, Hastings repeated. Think about it. A woman changes her face to escape her past. But someone wants to test, can she truly become another person? Or will her true nature reveal itself the moment she sees her new reflection? A philosophical approach to murder, Hastings muttered. Exactly so, Poirot agreed. Our criminal is not just a murderer. It's someone who plays with human nature like a cat with a mouse. Someone who uses science to study the boundaries between appearance and inner self. At that moment, Dr. Elliot entered the morgue with new papers. Monsieur Poirot, we've just discovered something else strange. The patient's medical history contains records of strange tests conducted a week before the surgery. What kind of tests? The detective quickly asked. Something like psychological experiments, the doctor replied. Light exposure, reaction to mirror reflections, all conducted under the supervision of our plastic reconstruction consultant, Dr. Lancelot Gray. Gray? Poirot repeated. An interesting name for someone dealing with masks and reflections. Dr. Gray is a leading expert on the psychology of appearance, Elliot explained. He developed a unique method of preparing patients for radical changes in appearance. And this method included contact with poisonous substances. Poirot sarcastically inquired. As far as we know, no, the doctor shook his head. But he's currently away at a conference in Switzerland. How convenient, the detective muttered. And of course, all records of these experiments have now disappeared. Unfortunately, yes, Elliot confirmed. But Nurse Radovansky mentioned seeing Dr. Gray conducting some strange procedures with mirrors. Mirrors again, Hastings exclaimed. Oui, Poirot thoughtfully said. Mirrors time poisons. All pieces of one picture. But where is the frame that connects them? He suddenly froze, then quickly headed for the exit. Ms. Amos, we urgently need to examine Dr. Gray's office. If I'm right, there we'll find the last piece of this mysterious mosaic. Chapter 5. The Room of Illusions. Dr. Gray's office was located in the west wing of the clinic, a separate room with thick soundproof walls. A sign on the door read, Patient Psychological Adaptation. Entry by appointment only. How strange, Poirot noted, examining the lock. The lock was forced from the inside. You think someone tried to hide something? Hastings asked. On the contrary, mon ami, the detective replied. Someone wanted us to know they had been here. It's another element of the game. They went inside. The room was nothing like a typical doctor's office. The walls were completely covered with mirrors at various angles, creating an effect of an endless labyrinth of reflections. In the center of the room stood a single chair, surrounded by a system of spotlights. Like in a theater, Hastings muttered. Oui, a theater of illusions, Poirot agreed. But here they played not only with light and shadow. Here they played with human fears. On the desk, they found a strange device, something like glasses with multiple lenses and wires. It's a device for creating optical illusions, explained the technician who had entered. Used in certain psychological experiments. And this. Poirot pointed to a small camera mounted in the corner. A high-resolution video camera, the technician replied. With infrared recording mode. So someone recorded what happened, Poirot said thoughtfully. But where are the recordings? He began methodically examining the room. His attention was drawn to one of the mirror panels. It was installed slightly crooked. Aha! He exclaimed, pressing an almost imperceptible protrusion. The panel slid aside, revealing a hidden cabinet. Inside were several videotapes, a notebook with notes, and a set of chemical reagents. Mon Dieu! Poirot carefully took out one of the vials. The same compounds that were on the mirror. So this is the killer's laboratory. Hastings gasped. Non, Poirot shook his head. This is the laboratory of someone who studied the boundaries between the external and internal worlds of humans. But someone used this knowledge to commit a crime. He began going through the notebook entries. Interessant. Here are described experiments with mirror recognition. Dr. Gray studied how a person's perception of their own identity changes after altering their appearance. But what does poison have to do with it? Hastings wondered. And that's the most interesting part. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Look at this diagram. It shows how certain chemicals can enhance or suppress emotional reactions to one's own reflection. You mean? Hastings began. Yes. Our criminal wasn't just killing. He was conducting an experiment, testing whether a person could be made to fear themselves to death. At that moment, their attention was drawn to a strange symbol engraved on the inside of the cabinet, 13 intertwined snakes forming a circle. "Le chiffre fatidique," Poirot whispered. 13. Now it's clear why exactly this time frame was chosen. 13 hours, the time needed for complete body intoxication through poison evaporation. But how could the patient not notice the toxic fumes? Hastings asked. "Parbleu, that's why all these mirrors and optical devices were needed. They distracted attention, created illusions. A person focused on their reflection and didn't notice the slow effect of the poison." Poirot returned to the notes. "There's something else here. A mention of Project Medusa." "Medusa?" Hastings repeated. "The one from mythology whose gaze turned people to stone." "Exactement," Poirot excitedly exclaimed. "In our case, a gaze that kills. But now the main question arises, who is behind this project? And why specifically this patient became its victim?" He carefully examined the videotapes, Toots seized cassettes. All are marked with dates and times. Except one. It has only one word, Pandora. Pandora, as in the myth of Pandora's box. Hastings wondered. "Precisement." Poirot carefully took out the cassette. "It seems we've found the key to this whole mystery." But before we watched the recording, he suddenly froze, listening. Vous entendez? Footsteps outside the door. Very light, almost silent. Chapter 6. Pandora's Box. The footsteps outside the door suddenly stopped. Poirot slowly placed the videotape back in the cabinet and gestured for Hastings to remain silent. His impeccable mustache trembled almost imperceptibly with tension. "Mon ami," he whispered, "do you remember the story of Pandora? Only that she opened the box despite being forbidden." Hastings whispered back. "Exactement." Poirot nodded. "And released all the evils of the world. But the most interesting part, what remained in the box last?" "Hope," Hastings whispered. "Voila." The detective's eyes sparkled. "Someone deliberately left this tape as bait, as our last hope to find the truth." At that moment, the door slowly began to open. Poirot quickly grabbed an empty cassette case and hid behind the mirror panel. Hastings followed his example. Nurse Radovansky entered the room. Her hands were shaking as she headed straight for the hidden cabinet. She took out the tape labeled Pandora and froze, staring at it. "Are you looking for something, mademoiselle?" Poirot suddenly spoke, stepping out from hiding. The nurse flinched and dropped the tape. I just decided to check if anything important was left here." Poirot continued softly. "Or perhaps you wanted to destroy evidence." No, she hastily objected. I just knew Dr. Gray kept something important here." "And why didn't you report this earlier?" Hastings asked. "I was afraid," the nurse admitted. "Dr. Gray said that if I told anyone about his experiments." "What experiments exactly?" Poirot quickly asked. "Project Medusa," she whispered. "He studied whether fear of one's own reflection could be used as a therapeutic method. But then other people appeared." "What people?" Poirot insisted. "They came at night." The nurse nervously fidgeted with the edge of her uniform. "They talked about some order, that the patient had to die exactly 13 hours after the surgery." "And who were these people?" The detective continued to press. "I don't know." The nurse shook her head. "They always wore masks. But one of them, he had a scar on his right eyebrow." "Le Mimon," Poirot exclaimed. "The same one who was looking for his sister." He thoughtfully looked at the tape. "Mademoiselle, have you ever seen this recording?" "No." The nurse shook her head. "But Dr. Gray once said that if anything happened to him, this tape should be handed over to the police." "Interesting," Poirot drawled. "And now tell me, why did you really come here today?" The nurse hesitated, then quietly said, "Because I recognized the patient." Comment. Poirot was surprised. "Not immediately," she explained. Only when I saw her old photographs in the documents. It was Countess Valentina Droceschi. She disappeared 2 years ago in Romania under mysterious circumstances. Rumini, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. The land of vampires and ancient legends. An interesting coincidence with the Medusa symbol, Nestsipa. Do you think it's somehow connected? Hastings asked. GQRQE. The detective nodded. All this mirrors 13 hours, Project Medusa, parts of one story. A story about how someone used science to embody ancient fears. He turned to the nurse, Mace Perquoy. Why did the Countess want to change her appearance? She was running from someone. The nurse lowered her voice. From her family. They practiced ancient rituals. Aha. So that's it. Poirot's eyes sparkled. And someone decided she shouldn't escape her past. That it would be better for her to die than to live another life. But what does the clinic have to do with it? Hastings wondered. It's the perfect place for such a crime, Poirot explained. Where else can you find specialists in changing appearances, equipment for psychological experiments, and access to chemical substances? So the clinic was chosen specifically, Hastings guessed. Poirot nodded. And Dr. Gray may not even have suspected that his research was being used for murder. He looked at the tape again. But now we can learn the truth. Ms. Amis, it's time to peek inside Pandora's box. Chapter 7. Reflection of Truth. The video viewing room seemed even more ominous in the dim light of the monitor. Poirot carefully inserted the tape into the old player. Hastings and Nurse Radovansky sat behind him, holding their breath. An image appeared on the screen, the very room with mirrors. In the chair sat a woman, Countess Droceschi before her surgery. Her face was pale, and her eyes expressed extreme terror. She knew, the nurse whispered. She knew they would find her. Silence. Poirot raised his hand. A voice could be heard on the recording. Experiment number 13. Project Medusa. Subject demonstrates increased sensitivity to own reflection after exposure to chemical compound X13. The Countess began thrashing in the chair, trying to look away from the mirrors, but a special head restraint system prevented her from doing so. Mon Dieu! Hastings exclaimed. They were. Yes, Poirot nodded. They deliberately amplified her fear of her own reflection. They were preparing her for death by self-poisoning. A person in protective clothing appeared on the screen, obviously Dr. Gray, initiating the next stage. The subject must associate her reflection with inevitable death. How cruel, the nurse whispered. Wait, Poirot stopped them. The next frame showed what happened after the Countess's death. 3 masked figures entered the room, one with a distinctive scar on his eyebrow. Subject neutralized, Scarface said. Project complete. But why this particular woman? Hastings asked. Poirot slowed down the recording. Regardez. In the corner of the screen, the Droceschi coat of arms. Snakes entwining a crown. 13 snakes. Le chiffre fatal, Hastings muttered. Exactement. Poirot excitedly exclaimed. This family had guarded an ancient secret for centuries. They say their ancestors worshipped Medusa as a death goddess. And what is this secret? Hastings impatiently asked. They believed they could transfer souls through reflections. Poirot explained. That every mirror contains a particle of a person's soul. And the Countess. She wanted to break this cycle. But who were these masked people? The nurse asked. Those who wanted to preserve the tradition at any cost, Poirot replied. Only. He suddenly froze. Ms. Amis noticed the wall behind the perpetrators. See the symbol. The same symbol was engraved on the wall, 13 intertwined snakes. But now Poirot noticed something new, set incroyable. It's a logo of Gray Medical Technologies. Hastings finished. Non, non, non. Poirot triumphantly exclaimed. Not Gray's. Look closer, it's GTM. Global Therapeutic Mirrors. But that's... Hastings began. the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. Poirot finished, and now everything falls into place. They used the clinic and Dr. Gray's research to create a new method of controlling human consciousness through reflections, the nurse concluded. Precisement, Poirot confirmed. The Countess was meant to be the final link in the chain of experiments. But something went wrong. What about the 13 hours? Hastings asked. The time needed for complete dissolution of the poisonous compound, Poirot explained. Exactly how long it takes for the body to absorb a lethal dose through skin contact with the treated mirror. But that means... The nurse paled. Oui, Poirot nodded. Dr. Gray had no idea his research was being used to create a weapon. He simply believed he was helping people adapt to their new appearance. And the medical conference in Switzerland? Hastings asked. A false alibi, Poirot stated confidently. They removed him when he started suspecting something. He might be in danger right now. But how do we prove the connection to GTM? Hastings wondered. Poirot took a photograph from his pocket. Voila! This man in the mask with the scar, head of GTM's research department. I recognized him at a medical conference last year. Then we have evidence. Hastings exclaimed. Non, Poirot shook his head. We only have the beginning. The main question remains, why this particular clinic? Why this particular patient? And what happened to Dr. Gray? Chapter 8. Gray's disappearance. Poirot stood by the viewing room window, watching as the evening twilight slowly deepened. His impeccable silhouette was reflected in the glass, just as the Countess Drokishi had once been reflected in her final room. Mon ami Hastings, he said without turning around, what do you see when you look at your reflection? Myself, Hastings answered, puzzled. Non. Poirot objected. You see what you want to appear as. Now imagine if someone could control that reflection. He sharply turned around. That is the true purpose of Project Medusa. Not just murder, control over human consciousness through manipulated reflections. But how did they plan to use it? Hastings asked. Exactly, Poirot exclaimed. It's far more dangerous than a simple weapon. Imagine mirrors in shopping malls, offices, homes, all becoming tools of manipulation. A person would see only what their controller wants them to see. And Dr. Gray, the nurse began, was merely a tool. Poirot nodded. A genius who created the methodology for adapting to a new appearance but didn't understand how it could be used for dark purposes. At that moment, a worried Dr. Elliot entered the room. Monsieur Poirot, we just received information from Switzerland. Dr. Gray never arrived at the conference. CQG penses, the detective exclaimed. Someone deliberately orchestrated his disappearance. But why? Hastings wondered. Parbleu. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Because he was too close to the truth. That's why he began those strange experiments with mirrors. He was trying to find a way to counteract it. Do you have any idea where he might be? Elliot asked. Oui, Poirot said slowly. Think about it. The clinic, the morgue, the mirror room. All parts of the system. But there's one place we haven't checked. The basement, Hastings suggested. Non, Poirot shook his head. The laboratory. The real laboratory, hidden behind all this. They descended to the clinic's basement. At the far end of the corridor, Poirot noticed a barely visible door with an electronic lock. Aha! He exclaimed. Now it's clear why our criminals used this particular clinic. There was already a ready-made research facility here. Dr. Elliot took out a universal key. I didn't know about this door's existence. Behind the door was a modern laboratory equipped with state-of-the-art technology. On the tables were samples of mirror coating, chemical reagents, and several photographs of Dr. Gray. Regardez. Poirot pointed to the wall where a board with calculations hung. He was trying to find an antidote to the effect of mirror poison. So he knew about their plans, Hastings guessed. Not only new, Poirot corrected him. He was trying to stop them. Look, these are notes on how to neutralize chemical compound X13. On the work desk, they found Dr. Gray's notebook. The last entry was written in hurried handwriting. They found me. I have only one night to complete the antidote formula. If I fail, the whole world will be in danger. They plan to launch the technology in a month at the International Medical Equipment Exhibition, using demonstration mirrors as. The entry ended abruptly. "UNE catastrophe," Poirot exclaimed. "We must find him before they carry out their plan." "But where to look?" Elliot asked. Poirot carefully examined the room and suddenly froze. "Ms. Amos, look at the floor. See these scratches? Someone recently moved a heavy object," Hastings realized. "Exactement." Poirot nodded. "And judging by the direction towards the cold storage chamber." They returned to the morgue. Poirot carefully examined the wall next to the refrigeration unit and found an almost imperceptible button. "Le dernier refuge," he whispered, pressing it. The wall silently slid aside, revealing a small chamber. Inside, tied to a chair, was Dr. Gray. His face was pale, but alive. "Faster," he weakly said. "They have copies of the formulas they." Chapter 9. The Salvation Formula. Dr. Gray was extremely weakened, but his eyes burned with determination. Poirot carefully helped him free himself from the ropes, attentively watching every movement. "Monsieur Poirot," the scientist whispered, "you must understand, this is not just a scientific experiment. It's a new generation weapon of mass destruction." "I know," the detective nodded. "But tell me everything from the beginning. Who are they? How far have they gone?" Gray took a deep breath. "It all started a year ago. GTM offered funding for my research on patients' psychological adaptation. They talked about a revolution in plastic surgery." "And you agreed?" Poirot finished. "Yes," Gray nodded. "But then I noticed strange things. Night visits. Secret experiments. They began combining my methods with some ancient practices. Romanian rituals of the Drocoshi family," Poirot suggested. "Exactly." Gray was surprised. "How do you—" "It doesn't matter," Poirot interrupted. "What happened next? They developed a way to implant chemical compounds into mirror coatings. These compounds can cause hallucinations, fear, panic, depending on the dosage. And after 13 hours, death. Just like with the Countess," Hastings muttered. "Yes," Gray nodded. "But that was only the beginning. They plan to use the technology at mass events. Imagine, International Medical Exhibition, thousands of people, and all demonstration mirrors treated with X13, Poirot finished. "Exactement," Gray exclaimed. "But there's one problem, the antidote. I managed to complete the formula before they found me." "And where is it?" Poirot quickly asked. Gray pointed to a small safe in the corner of the room. "There." "But it's coded." "The code?" Hastings impatiently asked. Gray smiled. "It's my last joke on my captors. The code is the number 13, repeated 3 times. Their symbol became their weakness." Poirot triumphantly looked at Hastings. "Voila. One must always understand the psychology of the opponent." In the safe, they found a vial with clear liquid and a detailed formula of the antidote. "But this isn't enough for mass production," noted Dr. Elliot. "You're right," Gray nodded. "We need a laboratory. Full production will take—" "How much time?" Poirot interrupted. "At least 12 days, Gray answered. "And until the exhibition there's 10, Poirot finished. "Num Doom Chen. But there's one option," Gray slowly said. "My private laboratory outside the city. It has all the necessary equipment. Then we don't lose a minute," Poirot exclaimed. At the clinic exit, they were met with a surprise. Several black cars blocked the road. Masked men emerged from them, led by the man with the scarred eyebrow. "Le moment de vérité," Poirot whispered. "Ms. Amos, it's time to show that little gray cells can defeat even an army. You have no chance, Scarface coldly stated. Hand over the formula, and we'll let you go. Ah, mais non. Poirot smiled. You see, we have one advantage. At that moment, the fire alarm system went off, and all the lights in the building went out. What? Scarface began. A simple little trick. Poirot's voice came from the darkness. Your obsession with control has made you blind to the simplest solutions. Follow me, Gray called, leading the group through the service exit. They made it to the backyard, where a car was already waiting for them. Mon ami Hastings, Poirot said, settling into the back seat. Remember, when dealing with reflections, the most important thing is to know where the true source of light is. Chapter 10, Shattered Mirrors. Dr. Gray's private laboratory was a veritable fortress of science. While the scientists worked on producing the antidote, Poirot paced around the room, piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. Now everything becomes clear, he said, steepling his fingers. This was not just a conspiracy by GTM Corporation. It was an entire web of interests. What kind? Hastings asked. Firstly, the Drokishi family. Poirot began to enumerate. Their ancient knowledge about control through reflections was key to the project. They provided those ritual components of Formula X13. And the Countess? Hastings clarified. She wanted to break this cycle, Poirot explained. But her death was meant to serve as the final key to completing the formula. Her fear of her own reflection was necessary for the final stage of the experiment. And what about the clinic, Doctor? Elliot asked. The clinic was perfect cover, Poirot continued. A place where faces and identities constantly change. Who would suspect anything amiss in the disappearance of yet another patient? But how did they plan to use the technology? Hastings wondered. Now that's the most interesting part. Poirot's eyes sparkled. At the exhibition, they were going to present a new line of smart mirrors for hospitals and nursing homes. Mirrors that care for patients' mental health. In reality, the perfect means of control. 10 days, Gray muttered, checking the equipment. We barely have enough time. Non. Poirot objected. We have an advantage. The enemy thinks we're defenseless. They won't rush. You're right, Scarface agreed, suddenly appearing at the door with his group of men. But now you've come straight to us. Encore une fois, Poirot exclaimed, but this time his voice sounded completely calm. You're forgetting one important detail. What? Scarface tensed up. Here your power through reflections is useless, the detective smiled. All the mirrors in the laboratory have been treated with the antidote. Scarface suddenly turned pale. What? We? Poirot triumphantly declared. While you were chasing us, Monsieur Gray managed to treat all the surfaces. And now, he pressed a button, and bright light flooded the room. The masked people began clutching their heads, their confidence evaporating along with the effects of X13. How do you like that, mes amis? Poirot asked. Using your own method against you? Bravo! Hastings exclaimed. But this isn't the end, Poirot reminded them. We need to prevent the spread of this technology. It's already done, Gray reported. I sent all the information to international medical organizations. In an hour, the whole world will know about it. Parfait. Poirot nodded in satisfaction. And now for the final touch. He turned to Scarface. You are the head of research at GTM, aren't you? Confess, who was behind all this? Scarface remained silent, but his gaze involuntarily darted to the Drokishi family crest on the wall. Just as I thought, Poirot nodded. Family duty. Old traditions. But you know what? The time of great secrets has passed. Today truth is more important than ancient rituals. 2 days later, newspaper headlines announced the exposure of a major pharmaceutical conspiracy. GTM Corporation was shut down, and the Drokishi family lost its influence. So, Poirot said, settling into his favorite armchair with a cup of cocoa, another case closed. But how did you figure out about the antidote? Hastings asked. Mon ami, the detective smiled. It was all in the symbolism. 13 hours, 13 snakes. They got so carried away with their symbolism that they forgot every mirror can be turned against its creator. And what will happen to Dr. Gray? Hastings asked. He will become a hero, Poirot replied. A genius who helped prevent a catastrophe. Although, perhaps, he'll slightly change the direction of his research. No more dangerous experiments with mirrors, Hastings clarified. On the contrary, Poirot objected. Only now they will serve one purpose, to show people their true faces. Without fear, without manipulation. Only pure truth. He looked at his reflection in the window. In the end, mon ami, the best mirror is one that shows not a person's appearance, but their soul. Thank you for listening to 13 Hours. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling adventures and intriguing tales.